Hey guys, tonight we're going to take a little trip back in time, to an age so obsessed with appearances it makes our modern Instagram filters look like child's play. We're stepping into the Victorian era. It's a world of quiet suffering for the sake of a perfect silhouette. A world where your complexion could signal your social status, and where even men were secretly cinching themselves into corsets. It's a fascinating, unfriendly, bizarre period, and honestly, you probably find the whole thing incredibly itchy. So, before you get comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe, but only if you genuinely enjoy what I do here. And while you're at it, let me know in the comments what city you're listening from, and what time it is for you. I love seeing how far these stories travel. Now, dim the lights, maybe turn on a fan for that soft background hum, and let's ease into tonight's journey together. The first thing you notice isn't a sight, but a feeling. A deep, penetrating dampness in the air that clings to your clothes and makes you feel the chill right down to your bones. You pull the heavy wool of your coat a little tighter. The air smells thick, a complex cocktail of coal smoke, damp earth, and the faint, sharp, earthy scent of horses. You open your eyes. It's not dark, not completely, but it's certainly not bright. The world is painted in shades of grey and sepia, illuminated by the flickering, golden glow of gas lights. They hiss softly from their posts along the street, casting low, dancing shadows that make familiar shapes seem strange and distorted. You're standing on a street paved with uneven cobblestones, slick with a thin layer of moisture. The sound is a symphony of clatter and sea lopping. Iron-rimmed carriage wheels grind against the stones, and the rhythmic, heavy tread of horses pulling hansom cabs and private broughams is the dominant percussion. There are no car horns, no engine hums, just this organic, mechanical clatter. You can hear the muffled calls of drivers and the low murmur of voices from passers-by, their words swallowed by the fog that hangs in the air. This isn't the clean, white fog of a country morning, it's a London pea souper, a thick, yellowish smog, courtesy of the thousands of coal fires burning in hearths and factories all across the city. This is the tangible result of the Industrial Revolution, a mainstream historical fact you can now taste on the back of your tongue. It's the smell of progress, but also the smell of a city choking on its own success. You take a tentative step, trying to find your footing on the slick stones. You see people moving past you, but they seem like silhouettes in the gloom. The men are dark columns in top hats and long coats. The women are sweeping shapes of dark fabric, their movements constrained, their footsteps quiet and deliberate. Everything is heavy. The architecture, the clothes, the very air itself. So it seems to stain everything, from the grand stone facades of the buildings to the cuffs of a gentleman's shirt. As you near across street, you have to be careful. The roads are not just damp, they are thick with a layer of mud and horse manure. It's a genuine hazard. And that's when you notice a small, red child, no older than 10, darting into the street with a worn-down broom. This is a crossing sweeper, a very real and rather sad occupation of the time. For a half-penny, this child will frantically sweep a narrow path through the muck for you, allowing you to cross the street without soiling the hem of your trousers or your long skirt. It's a strange, grim little piece of public service, a small, desperate economy born from the filth of the metropolis. This is one of those odd, forgotten details of daily life. You watch the wealthy patrons toss a coin and walk across the child's freshly swept path, their boots remaining pristine. It's a stark reminder of the rigid class structure that defines this world. Historians still debate just how aware the average Victorian was of this constant pollution and grime. Or if, to them, the smell of coal and the sight of a crossing sweeper were simply normal parts of the urban landscape, the unremarkable background noise of their lives. For you, it's a sensory assault. You turn away from the street and catch your reflection in the dark glass of a shop window. The gaslight from a nearby lamp illuminates your outline. You can't quite make out your face, but you see a shape, a silhouette, and there's something about that shape, The way the torso narrows dramatically in the middle before the skirt bows out, that feels alien. It's structured, rigid, and doesn't quite feel like your own. This figure in the glass is your first real introduction to the ideals of this era. It's not just a person, it's a carefully constructed form. And you're about to find out just what it takes to create that shape. Starting with the cage you can feel pressing against your ribs. You take a deep breath. Or rather, you try to. Your lungs hit a wall. It's not a wall of muscle or bone, but a rigid, unyielding barrier that seems to be squeezing you from all sides. You instinctively try to expand your chest, to draw in that satisfying, deep gulp of air, but you can't. The best you can manage is a series of shallow, quick sips that seem to only fill the very top of your lungs. This is your life now, breathing from the apex of your chest, a constant, subtle state of oxygen deprivation. Welcome to the world of the corset. You glance down at your own torso, the one you saw reflected in the shop window. Your dress is made of a heavy, dark taffeta that rustles with every slight movement. But beneath it, you are encased. The corset isn't just a piece of underwear, it's an architectural marvel of hollow bone or, for the less affluent, steel or even wood. Stiff canvas called coetal, and an intricate system of laces. Right now, it's exerting a firm, relentless pressure on your midsection. It pushes your ribs inward and upward, while simultaneously compressing your waist down. The goal to achieve the coveted hourglass figure, a tiny, wasp-like waist that emphasizes the swell of the bust and hips. The ideal measurement for a fashionable Victorian woman's waist was, quite terrifyingly, somewhere between 16 and 18 inches. For context, a modern, healthy woman's waist is often 10 to 15 inches wider than that. To achieve this, women would engage in a practice called tight lacing, a gradual process of cinching the corset tighter and tighter over time. You can feel the laces down your back, pulled taut, possibly by your own hands with the help of a bedpost, or more likely, by a maid who placed her foot on your back for leverage and pulled with all her might. You feel a dull ache spreading across your lower back. The corset is supposed to improve your posture, forcing you to sit and stand ramrod straight. The very picture of ladylike discipline. And it does. You couldn't slouch if you wanted to. But this enforced posture comes at a cost, weakening your own core muscles over time. Many women who wore corsets their entire lives found they couldn't sit or stand upright without them, their bodies having forgotten how to support themselves. Now for a little tidbit you wouldn't find in a mainstream textbook. While the corset was a symbol of femininity, it also came with its own secret language. The busk, the central, rigid piece of hollow bone or steel running down the front of the corset, was often removable in the 18th and 19th centuries. These buskes became a form of love token. A suitor might carve intricate designs, poems, or symbols onto a wooden or ivory busk and present it to his beloved. She would then wear this token pressed against her skin, a deeply intimate and hidden gift. It's a strangely romantic detail for an item often viewed as an instrument of oppression. The medical community of the time was fiercely divided on the corset. This is one of those topics where the debate was just as heated then as our modern discussions about diet fads. Some doctors championed it, claiming it supported the female form, aided in good posture, and even prevented unladylike slouching, which was thought to lead to moral laxity. They published pamphlets praising its virtues. Others, the so-called rational dress reformers, condemned it vehemently. They published equally dramatic pamphlets with terrifying diagrams showing how the corset displaced internal organs. They claimed it squeezed the liver, crushed the stomach, and compressed the lungs, leading to everything from indigestion and fainting spells to vapors to more serious conditions like uterine prolapse and respiratory disease. Historians today still argue about the true extent of the corset's health impact. While modern medical knowledge confirms that such compression would indeed displace organs and restrict breathing, some historians argue that the most extreme effects were likely limited to the most dedicated tight laces, and that for the average woman, the corset was worn less aggressively. It was more of a firm hug than a crushing vice. Still, the fact remains that you are wearing a cage. You shift your weight, and the hollow bone stays dig into your sides. You can feel your own heartbeat, a little too fast, a little too shallow. The simple act of bending over to pick something up is out of the question. You'd have to perform a graceful, calculated squat, keeping your spine perfectly straight. Laughing too hard feels risky. A sneeze feels like an internal earthquake. You are a living sculpture, beautiful from the outside, but inside, your body is in a constant, low-grade state of distress. This perfect figure, this symbol of your femininity and social standing, is achieved through restriction, and this is only the foundation. The quest for Victorian beauty has just begun, and it only gets more demanding from here. As you stand there, trying to regulate your breathing, you start to think about the next layer of this elaborate performance, your skin. You lift a gloved hand to your cheek. The fine kid leather is smooth against your skin, but you can feel the coolness of your own face even through the fabric. In the dim gaslight, your complexion appears luminous, almost translucent. This isn't an accident. This is the goal. In the Victorian mindset, the most desirable complexion for a woman of status was a delicate, almost ghostly white pallor. This wasn't just a matter of aesthetic preference, it was a powerful and immediate status symbol. Think about it. In an age before widespread industrialization had fully separated work from the home for everyone, a tan was the undeniable mark of the working class. It meant you toiled outdoors, in the fields, on a fishing boat, or doing other manual labor under the harsh gaze of the sun. Therefore, skin that was pale, smooth, and seemingly untouched by sunlight was the ultimate sign of a life of leisure. It declared to the world, without you ever having to say a word, that you were a lady. You did not work. You spent your days indoors, practicing the piano, doing needlepoint, reading poetry, or managing the household stuff. Your skin was a testament to your wealth and your husband's or father's ability to provide for you. To preserve this coveted pallor, you go to extraordinary lengths. When you do venture outside during the day, you are never without your arsenal of protective gear. A wide-brimmed bonnet, heavily decorated with ribbons and silk flowers, is not just a fashion accessory, it's a portable shade structure, strategically designed to cast your face in shadow. You carry a parasol, a delicate, often lace-trimmed umbrella that you hold aloft to block the sun's rays. And of course, the gloves. A lady never, ever exposed her bare hands to the elements. Your hands, like your face, had to remain soft, white, and unblemished. At home, your beauty routine is centered around maintaining and enhancing this paleness. You might wash your face with preparations of lemon juice or vinegar, both mild acids thought to lighten the skin. More elaborate concoctions could involve buttermilk, or even crushed strawberries and glycerin reapplied as a face mask overnight. The goal was to bleach away any hint of a sun-kissed glow or freckles, which were seen as common and undesirable. Here's a rather a little piece of advice from the era's beauty manuals to achieve that truly fashionable, slightly sickly look. Some women were encouraged to avoid food. Well, not all food, but certainly red meat and hearty, colorful vegetables. The thinking was that a diet of white foods like chicken, fish, and simple biscuits would contribute to a more delicate and pale complexion. It's an early, and quite unscientific, form of diet culture directly linked to aesthetics. This advice, often found in ladies' magazines, shows how deep the obsession ran, connecting everything from diet to complexion to social standing. The ideal of pale skin was so pervasive that it bled into the very language of beauty. Compliments would center on the likeness of a woman's skin to alabaster, porcelain, or a lily. This created an almost impossible standard, a beauty that was inherently fragile and almost anti-life. The perfect Victorian beauty looked as if she might faint at any moment, as if a strong gust of wind could knock her over. This cult of female invalidism, as some historians call it, romanticized sickness and fragility. A healthy, Rosy cheek glow was seen as rustic and unsophisticated. The ideal was to look ethereal, delicate, and completely removed from the grime and struggle of everyday life. Of course, not everyone was naturally blessed with a porcelain complexion. This created a huge market for cosmetics. But we'll get to the secret world of Victorian makeup later. For now, the focus is on achieving this look naturally, or at least through means that could be passed off as natural. This brings us to another one of those historical debates. Many popular historical accounts claim that Victorian women would use lead-based powders, like Venetian CERUs, to physically paint their faces white. While these products were definitely available and had been used for centuries, there's a significant debate among historians about how widespread their use actually was in the 19th century, especially among the respectable middle and upper classes. The prevailing Victorian ideology, heavily influenced by Queen Victoria herself, was that overt makeup, or painting, was the mark of an actress or a woman of ill repute. A true lady was supposed to enhance her beauty through subtle, natural means. So, while some may have secretly dusted their faces with dangerous white powders, many more likely relied on the less scandalous methods of sun avoidance, bleaching lotions, and a carefully curated diet. The pressure was immense. You look at your reflection again in a darker patch of the shop window, this time seeing the ghostly white of your face more clearly. It's the face of an aristocrat, of a lady of leisure, but it's also a mask, one that requires constant, vigilant maintenance. It's a beauty that whispers of a life lived indoors, in the shadows, away from the vibrancy and vitality of the sun. It is a beautiful, but confining, standard, and it's just one more piece of the elaborate costume you are required to wear. You turn away from your own reflection and your gaze falls upon a nearby townhouse. Through the tall, uncontained window of the first-floor drawing room, you see a scene that looks like it's been lifted directly from a painting. A woman is seated at a piano, her back perfectly straight, her hands poised elegantly over the ivory keys. Her focus is intense, her posture impeccable. A man, likely her husband, stands by the fireplace, reading a newspaper. The room is a picture of domestic tranquility, order, and propriety. The woman you are watching is the living embodiment of the ultimate Victorian ideal, the angel in the house. This phrase, which sounds so lovely and poetic, comes from a wildly popular narrative poem by Coventry Patmore, first published in 1854. The poem celebrated his wife as the perfect woman, and in doing so, created a powerful and pervasive cultural archetype. The angel in the house was to be the moral center of the home, while her husband battled the corrupt, dirty, and competitive world of commerce and industry outside. Her role was to create a sanctuary of peace, piety, and purity within the domestic sphere. As this angel, your life is governed by a strict and often unspoken code of conduct. You are expected to be submissive, pious, and utterly selfless. Your needs, your desires, and your ambitions are always secondary to those of your husband and your children. Your purpose is to be a comforting presence, a source of moral guidance, and the flawless manager of the household. You are responsible for overseeing the servants, planning the meals, managing the budget, a surprisingly complex task, and curating a home that is both beautiful and morally upright. Your education, if you were fortunate enough to receive one, was tailored specifically for this role. You learned just enough French to sound sophisticated, just enough art to appreciate beauty, and just enough music to entertain guests in the parlor. These were called accomplishments. They were not meant to foster a career or intellectual independence, but to make you a more charming wife and a more capable hostess. A deep knowledge of science, politics, or philosophy was often seen as unfeminine and even dangerous, as it might give you ideas above your station. Your very movements are policed by this ideal. You must walk gracefully, without rushing. Use it with your back straight, your ankles crossed. Your voice should be soft and gentle, your laughter light and controlled. Strong emotions, especially anger or passionate disagreement, are considered highly unladylike. You are the calm, serene heart of the family, and any display of emotional turbulence is a failure to uphold that ideal. Now for a peculiar little detail that highlights the absurdity of it all. This ideal of the passionals, pure, and domestic angel had a strange and somewhat contradictory relationship with the burgeoning field of science. In an attempt to justify this social order, some Victorian doctors and pseudo-scientists began promoting the idea that women were biologically less passionate than men. They argued that a woman's reproductive system made her inherently more passive and less sexually driven. This scientific fact was then used to reinforce the social expectation that women should be uninterested in physical pleasure. It's a classic example of science being molded to fit a pre-existing cultural bias. The irony, of course, is that the very same society was rife with hidden anxieties about female desire. But the official line was that the angel in the house was above such base instincts. Historians continue to debate the extent to which real women actually lived up to this impossibly perfect standard. Was the angel in the house a genuine role model that women aspired to? Or was it a fictional ideal created and perpetuated by men, a standard that most women privately found suffocating? The truth, as is often the case, is likely somewhere in the middle. Diaries and letters from the period show that many women did internalize this ideal and took great pride in their role as domestic managers and moral guides. They saw it as a source of power and influence, albeit a limited one. Others railed against it, finding it restrictive and intellectually stifling. The famous writer Virginia Woolf would later say that to be a female writer, one must kill the angel in the house, a testament to how long this ideal persisted and how restrictive it felt to ambitious women. Looking back at the woman in the window, you see her finish her piece on the piano. She doesn't look up for applause. She simply folds her hands in her lap, a picture of placid contentment. She is beautiful. She is graceful. She is the moral bedrock of her family. But she is also a captive in a gilded cage. Her world is the home. Her work is self-sacrifice. Her value is measured by her piety and her purity. This ideal of behavior is as much a part of the Victorian beauty standard as the corset on her torso or the pale skin on her face. It is an internal corset, shaping her very personality, her thoughts, and her ambitions into a form that society deemed acceptable and beautiful. It is the soul of the Victorian woman, styled and restricted to match her body. You raise a hand to your head, feeling the immense weight of your own hair. It's not just the hair itself, but the intricate structure it's been forced into it. It feels heavy, unbalanced, and precariously pinned. A slight, sudden turn of your head sends a worrying wobble through the whole construction, and you instinctively freeze, waiting to see if a cascade of hairpins will rain down onto your shoulders. Welcome to the elaborate and oft unpunishing world of Victorian hairstyling. Hair was a Victorian woman's crowning glory, a powerful symbol of her femininity, health, and even her morality. Long, thick, and healthy hair was considered one of her most significant assets. From a young age, you would have been taught to care for it meticulously. Girls wore their hair down or in simple braids. But once a woman came out in society or was married, her hair went up. To wear one's hair down in public as an adult woman was a sign of being either an innocent child or, on the other end of the spectrum, a sullen woman. The act of putting your hair up was a rite of passage, a signal of your entry into womanhood and all the responsibilities that came with it. Your current hairstyle is a masterpiece of sculpture. It's likely parted neatly down the center, a style made popular by the young Queen Victoria herself. The front sections are smoothed down, looped over your ears, and then pulled back to join the rest of the hair in a complex arrangement of braids, coils, and plaits at the nape of your neck or the back of your head. It's held in place by an astonishing number of hairpins, made of tortoiseshell, bone, or metal. The sheer volume is what's most striking. To achieve this look, you probably don't rely on your natural hair alone. This is where the secrets come in. Hidden within that magnificent coiffure are probably rats or pads, small cushions made of horsehair, or even your own collected hair from your brush used to add volume and shape. You also might be wearing switches or frisettes, which were pre-made braids or curls of false hair that could be seamlessly integrated into your own to create a fuller, more elaborate style. These hairpieces were big business, advertised in ladies' magazines and sold in specialty shops. The idea was to have so much hair that it looked almost burdensome, a sign of immense vitality and health. Here's a curious little fact about Victorian hair care. The concept of frequent washing, as we know it today, did not exist. Washing one's hair was an ordeal. It was believed that washing too often, say, more than once a month, would strip the hair of its natural oils and lead to sickness, like catching a cold. Instead, daily maintenance consisted of vigorous brushing. You would be expected to brush your hair with a ball bristle brush for a long time each night, often 100 strokes. This was thought to clean the hair by distributing the natural scalp oils down the hair shaft and brushing out any dirt or dust. Between these infrequent washings, women would use dry powders like cornstarch or orris root to absorb excess oil, a precursor to our modern dry shampoo. The styles changed throughout the era, as fashion always does. In the early Victorian period, the look was more subdued, with those smooth loops over the ears and a simple bun. By the mid-century, with the advent of the massive crinoline skirts, hairstyles had to get bigger to maintain a sense of proportion. This is when you see more heightened width, often decorated with ribbons, pearls, or even fresh flowers for evening wear. And by the late Victorian era, the famous Gibson girl look came into fashion, a softer, more voluminous style piled high on the head, which symbolized a more active and independent type of womanhood. The debate among historians on this topic often revolves around the meaning of it all. Was this obsession with elaborate hair a form of creative expression for women who had few other outlets, or was it yet another form of social control? A time-consuming ritual that kept women focused on their appearance. Some scholars argue that the act of a woman doing her hair, or having a maid do it for her, was a private, feminine ritual, a space of quiet creativity. Others point out that the sheer impracticality of these styles reinforced a life of leisure. You couldn't exactly perform hard labor with a delicate chign on held together by 50 pins and a false hairpiece. You can feel a slight tension headache starting at the base of your skull from the sheer weight and tightness of your hairstyle. It's beautiful, no doubt. In the gaslight, the smooth sections gleam, and the intricate braids at the back are a testament to skill and patience. But it's also a trap. It restricts your movement, demands constant upkeep, and literally weighs you down. It's a crown, yes, but a heavy one. Like the corset, it's a form of beautiful confinement. Another essential element in constructing the perfect Victorian woman, from the inside out. You catch a glimpse of your face again, not in a shop window this time, but in the small, silver-backed hand mirror you retrieve from your reticule. The light is still dim, but you can see enough. Your skin is pale, as required. Your cheeks, however, have a faint, delicate flush, a healthy-looking bloom that seems to contradict the fashionable ideal of sickly pallor. Your lips have a hint of rosy color, and your eyebrows are subtly defined. It looks entirely natural, as if you just came in from a brisk, ladylike stroll, but it's a lie, a carefully constructed, socially acceptable lie. You are wearing makeup, but the entire point is that no one is supposed to know. Welcome to the clandestine world of Victorian cosmetics. As you know, the official, public stance, championed by the Queen and echoed in every respectable publication, was that painting one's face was vulgar. It was the practice of stage actresses, courtesans, and other women of questionable morals. A true lady was to rely on her natural beauty, enhanced only by good health, clean living, and piety. To be accused of wearing rouge was a serious social slight, but the desire to enhance one's appearance is a powerful one, and Victorian women were nothing if not resourceful, so they developed an entire culture of invisible makeup. The products you're wearing are not bold or obvious. They are subtle, designed to mimic the effects of natural vitality without screaming cosmetics. That faint flush on your cheeks, it wasn't achieved with a cake of bright red rouge. Instead, you might have used a liquid or cream-based tint that you could rub into your skin until it was just a whisper of color. Some women would even resort to pinching their cheeks repeatedly before entering a drawing room to bring a temporary rush of blood to the surface. For your lips, you might have used a tinted salve or lip balm, something that looked more like a medicinal product than a vanity item, or in a pinch, you might have discreetly bitten your lips for a similar effect. Eyebrows and eyelashes were darkened with elderberry juice, or by using a simple pomade made of beeswax and charcoal or even crushed burnt cork, applied with a delicate touch. The goal was never a dramatic, painted-on look, but a subtle enhancement that one could plausibly deny. The packaging and marketing of these products were key to their social acceptability. They were often sold in pharmacies rather than perfume ryes, disguised as medicinal treatments or toilet waters. A face powder wouldn't be called a powder, it would be called a finishing cream or a lotion to reduce shine. A cheek tint might be sold as a rosy balm for chapped skin. This clever marketing allowed a woman to purchase and use these items without sacrificing her reputation. Here's a wonderfully weird tip from the era that illustrates this secrecy perfectly: the geranium leaf trick. Some beauty guides suggested that a woman could keep a red geranium petal in her pocket. When she needed a bit of color, she could discreetly excuse herself to a private room, lick the petal, and then rub the faint red stain onto her cheeks and lips. It was the ultimate organic, untraceable cosmetic. This little tidbit shows the lengths women would go to in order to conform to two contradictory standards at once: the standard of looking naturally beautiful and the standard of not using makeup to achieve it. The historical debate here is a fascinating one. For a long time, the prevailing narrative was that Victorians simply did not wear makeup. This was based on the public pronouncements and the moralistic tone of the era's literature. However, more recent historical research, delving into private diaries, letters, and crucially, the business records of pharmaceutical and cosmetic companies, has painted a much more complex picture. Historians now largely agree that makeup use was far more common than previously believed. But it existed in this shadowy, don't ask, don't tell space. The argument that continues is just how widespread it was across different social classes and what it reveals about the private lives versus the public faces of Victorian women. Did they feel guilty about this deception, or was it seen as a clever, harmless game? The products themselves were often homemade, brewed in the kitchen like a recipe for soup. A popular recipe for a face powder, for instance, involved mixing powdered zinc oxide with cornstarch and a little orris root for fragrance. But many commercially available products contain dangerous ingredients we've already touched upon, like lead and mercury, which could be absorbed through the skin over time. So this secret beauty routine was not without its risks. You carefully put the mirror back in your small purse. The face you present to the world is a delicate illusion. It is a performance of natural beauty, achieved through unnatural means. It is a tightrope walk between the desire to be attractive and the demand to be modest. Every element, from your flushed cheeks to your subtly darkened lashes, is a testament to your ability to navigate the complex and contradictory rules of your society. It's exhausting. This constant performance of effortless, natural perfection, and it's a secret you share with almost every other respectable woman you see. A silent, unspoken conspiracy of beauty. You smooth down the front of your dress and your gloved fingers brush against each other. The kid leather is soft and immaculate, a perfect, unbroken sheath covering your hands. You glance around at the other women you pass on the street or see through shop windows. Every single one of them who appears to be of a certain social standing has her hands covered. Gloves are not optional, they are a mandatory piece of a lady's attire, as essential as her bonnet or her shoes. But the obsession with hands went far deeper than just keeping them covered in public. The state of a woman's hands was a miniature billboard advertising her social class. In the Victorian era, a lady's hands were expected to be idle. They were to be soft, pale, slender, and utterly free from any signs of labor, redness, calluses, broken nails, or any kind of blemish were considered horrificously vulgar. It meant you engaged in manual work scrubbing floors, washing laundry, or even just tending your own garden without proper protection. A perfect pair of hands was therefore a direct reflection of your status as a lady of leisure. It proved that you had servants to perform all the arduous tasks of daily life. To maintain this ideal, your hand care routine would be almost as rigorous as your skin care. You would wear gloves for nearly every activity. Heavier, more practical gloves for gardening or other dirty work if you engaged in it at all, and delicate, decorative gloves for going out. At night, you would likely slather your hands in a thick cream or balm made from ingredients like glycerin, rosewater, and almond oil, and then sleep in a pair of loose-fitting cotton gloves. This was done to keep them perpetually soft and white. The shape of the hands was also subject to scrutiny. Long, tapering fingers and oval-shaped nails were considered the most elegant. There were even exercises prescribed in ladies' magazines to improve the flexibility and grace of the fingers. A handshake, if one were even offered, was a moment of judgment. A firm, strong grip was considered masculine and coarse. A lady was to offer a light, delicate touch, barely making contact. This brings us to a slightly bizarre but revealing tidbit: the fear of the red-handed woman. This wasn't just a turn of phrase. Manuals on etiquette and beauty from the period give stark warnings about the social consequences of having red, chapped hands. They advised women to avoid using harsh soaps and to never, ever plunge their bare hands into hot water. One beauty guide from the 1872 gives a rather extreme recipe for a hand whitening paste involving lemon juice, and suggests leaving it on overnight. The hands were such a focal point that their appearance could genuinely affect a woman's social standing and marriage prospects. They were a microcosm of the larger obsession with the pale, fragile, and work-free ideal of beauty. The language of hands was incredibly nuanced. Holding them clasped demurely in your lap signaled modesty. Using them to gesture gracefully while speaking was a sign of a good upbringing. Even the way you removed your gloves in a host's home was governed by etiquette. It had to be done smoothly and discreetly. It was all part of the performance of effortless gentility. Historians are still exploring the deeper psychological impact of these standards. On one hand, this focus on hands could be seen as another layer of restriction, another part of the female body policed and judged. It reinforced the idea that a woman's value was tied to her ornamental, non-productive status. On the other hand, some scholars argue that for women, their hands were one of the few areas where they could exercise a high degree of control and artistry. The care of their hands, the choice of their gloves, the practice of delicate gestures, these could be seen as small acts of self-creation in a world that offered them few other outlets for expression. The debate continues on whether this was a source of pride or a symbol of confinement. You look down at your own gloved hands, resting one over the other. They are anonymous, hidden, beneath the leather. They are pale and soft. The nails perfectly manicured. They are the hands of someone who doesn't work, who doesn't struggle, who doesn't even open her own doors. They are beautiful. They are perfect. And they are, in their own way, completely useless for anything other than looking beautiful and perfect. They are the quiet, delicate punctuation mark at the end of the sentence that is your public persona. They signify your status with a silence more profound than any spoken word. As you continue your journey through this world, you realize that every single part of you, from the top of your elaborately coiled head to the tips of your sheltered fingers, is being shaped and presented according to a very specific and very demanding blueprint. You decide to move on, to walk a little further down the street. As you take a step, you have to consciously navigate your own personal space. You are not just a person, you are a person occupying a massive circle of territory, defined by the vast circumference of your skirt. You have to turn sideways to pass through a slightly narrower gap between a lamppost and a wall. Entering a shop requires a careful, deliberate maneuver, like docking a small ship. This is life inside a crinoline. What you're wearing under your heavy taffeta dress is essentially a collapsible cage. The crinoline, which dominated fashion from the mid-1850s to the late 1860s, was a bell-shaped petticoat structured with a series of flexible steel hoops. These hoops, graduated in size from small at the waist to enormous at the hem, are held together with vertical fabric tapes. This contraption is surprisingly lightweight compared to the multiple layers of heavy petticoats it replaced, but is incredibly cumbersome. Your skirt swings and sways around you as you walk, creating its own gentle breeze. The crinoline was a revolution in fashion. It freed women from the weight of 6 or 7 starched petticoats that were previously required to achieve a wide-skirted look. In that sense, it was seen as a liberation. It was also, for the first time, a piece of fashion technology that was mass-produced and affordable. This meant that for the first time in history, a housemaid could wear a skirt with the same fashionable silhouette as a duchess. This democratization of fashion was thrilling for some and deeply unsettling for others in the rigid class structure of Victorian England. Suddenly, you couldn't tell a woman's social standing simply by her silhouette from a distance. But living in a crinoline was fraught with peril. The sheer size of it made everyday tasks a challenge. Simply sitting on a sofa required a practiced technique of gathering the hoops behind you to avoid having them fly up in your face. A gust of wind was your mortal enemy, threatening to flip your entire skirt up and expose your ankles. Or worse, your drawers a moment of profound social humiliation. And now for the truly strange and dangerous part of the crinoline. A detail often glossed over in fashion histories, it was a massive fire hazard. The combination of a wide, lightweight, and highly flammable cotton dress stretched over a cage, worn in a world lit by open flames, gas lights, candles, and fireplaces was a recipe for disaster. There are numerous, horrifying accounts from the period of women getting too close to a fireplace, their skirts catching a spark, and the entire structure being engulfed in flames in a matter of seconds. The cage-like structure created a chimney effect, drawing the fire upwards. It was nearly impossible to extinguish. Thousands of women are estimated to have died this way. The famous poet Henry Wadsworth Longfellow's wife, Valerie, tragically died after her dress caught fire in 1861. Beyond the fire risk, there were other, more industrial dangers. The newspapers of the day were filled with cautionary tales of women in factories getting their crinoline escort in machinery, with devastating results. The sheer absurdity of it all was not lost on the Victorians themselves. The satirical magazine Punch was filled with cartoons mocking the crinoline, showing women stuck in doorways, sweeping things off tables with their giant skirts, or causing general chaos in public spaces. The historical debate around the crinoline is particularly interesting. Was it a symbol of female oppression? A cage that exaggerated female helplessness, unrestricted movement, or was it, as some feminist fashion historians have argued, a tool of empowerment? This latter argument suggests that the crinoline created a definitive personal space for women. In an increasingly crowded urban environment, the crinoline forced men to keep their distance. It made it physically impossible for a man to get too close, to stand too near, or to offer an unwanted touch. In this view, the crinoline can be read as a form of social armor, a way for women to claim a physical territory of their own in public. The argument remains a lively one in fashion studies. You stop for a moment and look down at the vast expanse of fabric that surrounds you. It rustles and sways, beautiful, bell-like shape. It is elegant, it is fashionable. It is also a potential death trap and a constant logistical nightmare. It's a perfect metaphor for so much of Victorian female existence, beautiful on the surface, but cumbersome, restrictive, and secretly dangerous underneath. You've now been corseted, powdered, cored, and caged within your own clothes. But so far, our focus has been entirely on you, on the female experience. It's time to turn our attention across the street, where a gentleman has just stepped out of a tobacconist's shop. He too is a work of art, and his beauty standards are just as demanding. You shift your attention from your own predicament and look across the cobbled street. A man has just emerged from a shop, pausing to light a cigar. He is the epitome of fashionable masculinity. H.E.S. not rugged or unkempt. On the contrary, he looks as meticulously constructed as you do, just in a different style. His top hat is perched at a precise angle. His wool frock coat is impeccably tailored, cut to create a strong shoulder line and a narrow waist. His trousers are perfectly pressed, and his leather shoes are polished to a mirror shine. This is not just a man, this is a dandy or a swell. A figure who took male grooming and fashion to an art form. While the story of Victorian vanity often focuses on women, the pressures on men, particularly those of the upper and middle classes, were also immense. The ideal Victorian gentleman was a picture of sobriety, discipline, and success. His appearance was his resume, a public declaration of his character and his position in society. A sloppy or careless appearance could suggest a sloppy or careless mind, potentially harming his business prospects and his social standing. The figure of the dandy emerged in the Regency period with icons like Beau Brummel, but the Victorian era adapted it. The Victorian dandy wasn't necessarily as flamboyant as his predecessors, but he was just as obsessed with detail. The goal was an air of effortless perfection, which, ironically, required a tremendous amount of effort. His day would begin with an elaborate grooming ritual. This was a quick shower and shave. It was a multi-step process. His valet would have laid out his clothes. But before dressing, there was the matter of hygiene. A morning wash, perhaps with a basin of cold water, was essential. Shaving was a delicate operation, performed with a straight razor that had to be expertly stroked to a keen edge. For many, a trip to the local barber for a professional shave was a daily ritual. A male social space filled with the scent of bay rum and the murmur of conversation. Then came the choice of attire. The uniform of the gentleman, the dark suit, was established during this period. But within that uniformity, there was infinite room for subtle distinction. The quality of the wool, the cut of the lapel, the knot of his cravat or tie, these were all signals to other men in the know. His shirt had to be brilliantly white and heavily starched, especially the collar and cuffs. The stiffness of a man's collar was a sign of his respectability. It held his head high, forcing a posture of dignified alertness. And here's a quirky little detail that speaks volumes: the obsession with clean linens. A true gentleman was expected to change his shirt, collar, and cuffs daily, if not more often, because cities were so filled with soot and grime. A white shirt would become visibly dirty very quickly. Having a fresh, snow-white shirt was a clear indication that you could afford the laundry bills. It was a subtle but powerful display of wealth. This is why detachable collars and cuffs became so popular. You could just change the soiled parts without having to launder the entire shirt. A clever bit of sartorial economics. The historical debate around the dandy often centers on his masculinity. Was this intense focus on appearance seen as effeminate, not in the Victorian context? In fact, it was quite the opposite. This meticulous grooming was seen as a form of self-discipline, a masculine trait. It demonstrated control, precision, and an attention to detail that mirrored the qualities needed to succeed in business or the military. The flamboyant, brightly colored dandy of the past was replaced by a more sober, powerful figure whose elegance was expressed through perfect tailoring and pristine cleanliness rather than bright silks and lace. Some historians argue this shift to the dark uniform suit represents the rising power of the bourgeoisie, who wanted to express their status through quality and sobriety, not the flamboyant excesses of the old aristocracy. As you watch the gentleman across the street, you see him adjust his cravat, a small, precise movement. He checks his reflection in the shop window. Just as you did, he is performing his masculinity just as you are performing your femininity. His costume is one of control, discipline, and public respectability. It may seem less physically punishing than your corset and crinoline, but it is no less a costume. It is a carefully curated facade designed to project a very specific image to the world. And we haven't even gotten to the most defining feature of the Victorian man's appearance. The feature that sat, quite literally, right in the middle of his face is facial hair. The gentleman across the street takes a puff from his cigar, and the faint light from the gas lamp catches the impressive architecture of his facial hair. It's not just a simple beard or a mustache, it's a statement. He sports a magnificent set of dun dreary whiskers, also known as Piccadilly weepers. These are long, flowing sideburns that are completely disconnected from the mustache, while the chin itself is kept clean-shaven. The effect is dramatic, framing his face with two curtains of hair. This isn't a sign of laziness, it is a carefully cultivated and highly fashionable choice. If the Victorian era had a single defining feature for male appearance, it was the explosion of facial hair. After more than a century of clean-shaven faces being the norm for gentlemen, the beard and mustache made a triumphant and hairy return in the mid-19th century. This beard movement was not just a random whim of fashion. It was deeply tied to new ideas about masculinity, health, and even national identity. So one, a thick, full beard was seen as a symbol of virility and authority. In an age of industrial might and colonial expansion, the beard was a way for a man to project an image of rugged strength and power. It was the face of the explorer, the soldier, the patriot. The clean-shaven look began to be seen as boyish or even overly French and foppish. The British man was to look sturdy and formidable, and a beard was the perfect accessory. There was also a pervasive medical argument for growing a beard. Doctors and so-called health experts of the time began to argue that facial hair was a natural filter or respirator. They claimed it could protect a man from the polluted city air, filtering out the soot, dust, and miasma bad airs that ought to cause diseases like bronchitis and tuberculosis. The mustache, they argued, would warm the air before it entered the lungs. It was promoted as a genuine health device, a natural defense mechanism in a sickly urban environment. The sheer variety of styles was staggering. You had the full beard, the chin curtain popularized by Abraham Lincoln in America, the walrus mustache drooping over the lips, and the handlebar mustache, with its ends waxed into jaunty curls. Each style had its own connotations. Military men, for example, were often required to have a mustache but were restricted in beard length. The choice of style was a way for a man to express his personality, profession, or even his political leanings. A man's facial hair was a billboard on his face. And now for a strange little detail that reveals the depth of this obsession. Keeping these elaborate facial structures in shape was a serious business. For men with particularly grand mustaches, there was a risk of them drooping sadly into their tea or soup. To solve this very Victorian problem, a special piece of ceramic was invented, the mustache cup. Patented in the 1862 by a potter named Harvey Adams, it was a teacup with a small, semicircular ledge of ceramic built across the top. This ledge had a small opening, allowing the man to sip his tea while the guard held his mustache safely out of the hot liquid, preserving its waxed shape. These became incredibly popular and are now collector's items. The historical debate on this topic often revolves around the why this sudden, fervent embrace of facial hair after a century of clean faces. The health argument is certainly part of it, as is the desire to project a more rugged masculinity. Some historians link it directly to the Crimean War in the 1852. Soldiers returning from the harsh conditions of the war had grown beards out of necessity, and they came back as national heroes. Their bearded look was seen as manly, unpatriotic, and it quickly caught on back home. Other historians argue it was a reaction against the increasing presence of women in the public sphere as gender roles began to blur slightly. A massive beard was an unmistakable, biological signal of maleness. It was a way of reasserting traditional gender differences. You look again at the man's dreary whiskers. They are glossy and well-tended. They probably require daily washing, combing, and the application of some kind of scented oil or wax to keep them in shape. They are, in their own way, as high maintenance as your own elaborate hairstyle. They are a testament to his dedication to the craft of appearance. This was just about not shaving. It was a deliberate, artistic, and deeply meaningful act of grooming that defined the face of the Victorian man, and that grooming went far beyond just the hair on his face. The gentleman finishes his cigar, tapping the ash onto the damp cobblestones. As he turns his head, the gaslight catches a subtle, glossy sheen in his hair. It's not wet, but it's perfectly coiffed, with every strand seemingly shellacked into place. The air around him carries the faintest scent, not the heady floral perfume a woman might wear, but something richer and earthier, a mix of sandalwood, bay rum, and something waxy. You are smelling the ubiquitous products of the Victorian male toilette hair pommades, waxes, and oils. Just as a woman's hair was her crowning glory, a gentleman's hair was a key indicator of his refinement. The tidy, well-kept head of hair signaled discipline and attention to detail. Letting one's hair grow into an untamed mane was associated with radical poets, starving artists, or European revolutionaries, not the kind of image a respectable man of business or society wanted to project. The goal was control. The hair should be neat, parted cleanly, and sculpted. To achieve this, men relied on a whole pharmacy of products. The most common of these was pomade, a greasy or waxy substance used to style hair and give it a sleek, shiny appearance. These pomades were often made from animal fats, most famously bear grease. Bear's grease pomade was wildly popular and heavily marketed, with tins often featuring dramatic illustrations of bears. It was sold with the claim that it would not only help style the hair but also prevent baldness and promote thick, healthy growth. This brings us to a rather grimy little secret of the era. While some of these products did contain a small amount of actual bear fat, for the most part, the bear's grease was a marketing gimmick. The base ingredient was far more likely to be lard pig fat, which was then perfumed with essential oils like bergamot, rosemary, or cassia to mask the porky smell. So the average dandy was likely walking around with scented lard in his hair. These greasy pomades had a significant side effect. They were notorious for staining everything they came into contact with. This led to the invention of a specific piece of household furniture, the antimacassar. An antimacassar is a small cloth, often made of lace or crochet, that was draped over the back of a chair or sofa. Its sole purpose was to protect the fabric of the furniture from the greasy macassar oil, another popular hair product in pomades that men would leave behind when they rested their heads. If you've ever seen these lacy doilies on old furniture in a museum or an antique shop, you're looking at a direct solution to the problem of greasy Victorian men's hair. Beyond pomades, there were mustache waxes, specifically designed to be stiffer, allowing a man to sculpt his mustache into those elaborate handlebar curls. These were often made with beeswax and resin. Then there were the calomnies and toilet waters. A gentleman would not douse himself in scent, but a subtle application of a masculine fragrance like bay rum or spicy, clove-scented lotion or a woodsy cologne was a sign of refinement. It showed he took care of himself and could afford such luxuries. The academic discussion around these grooming practices often touches on themes of class and consumerism. The rise of these branded, mass-produced male grooming products marks a key moment in the history of capitalism. Advertisements for pomades, razors, and calomnies filled the pages of newspapers and magazines. Brands like Pears Soap and Roland's Macassar Oil became household names. Historians debate whether this was a case of companies cleverly creating a need that didn't previously exist, or if they were simply responding to a pre-existing male desire for self-improvement and distinction. It was likely a bit of both. This new consumer culture encouraged men to see their bodies and their appearance as projects to be worked on and improved through the purchase of specific products. You watch the gentleman replace his top hat, a final, definitive gesture. His entire appearance, from the perfect knot in his cravat to the subtle sheen on his hair, is a testament to this culture of meticulous self-presentation. It's a performance of masculinity that is quiet, controlled, and deeply reliant on a hidden world of products and rituals. It's a different kind of cage from your crinoline, But a cage nonetheless, a cage of expectations and endless maintenance. But the most surprising part of his carefully constructed silhouette is the one that lies hidden beneath the tailored perfection of his coat. It's a secret he shares with you. You continue to observe the gentleman across the street. His posture is ramrod straight, almost military in its bearing. His shoulders are broad, his back is flat, and his waist has a distinct, sharp taper before his coat flares out slightly over his hips. It's an idealized masculine form. Projecting strength and discipline, you might assume this V-shaped torso is the result of natural physique, rigorous exercise, or simply masterful tailoring. And while tailoring certainly plays a part, there's a good chance he has a secret weapon working underneath it all. A secret you know all too well, a corset. Yes, you read that right. While the corset is overwhelmingly associated with women, a significant number of Victorian men also wore them. This is one of those historical facts that often surprises people, as it seems to contradict our modern notions of masculinity. But in the 19th century, male corsetry, while not as ubiquitous as its female counterpart, was a known, if sometimes discreet, practice. Men wore corsets for several reasons. The primary motivation was fashion. Just as women sought the perfect hourglass, men aspired to the military or Adonis figure. This meant broad shoulders, a well-defined chest, and a trim, narrow waist. A corset was the quickest way to achieve this. It would cinch the waist, smooth out any unseemly bulges around the midsection, and provide a rigid foundation that made the man's coat hang more elegantly. It was particularly popular among dandies and men in fashionable society who wanted to achieve that perfect, sleek silhouette. Another key reason was posture. In an era that prized discipline and self-control, slouching was seen as a sign of moral weakness and laziness. A male corset, sometimes called a waist belt or girdle to make it sound more masculine, forced the wearer to stand and sit bolt upright. For military officers, it was almost part of the uniform, helping them maintain the proud, chest-out posture that was expected of them. Prince Albert, Queen Victoria's husband, was a known corset wearer, which certainly helped to popularize and legitimize the trend among the upper classes. Finally, some men wore them for supposed health reasons, much like the arguments for beards. Corsets were marketed to men as providing back support, aiding digestion, and even preventing kidney trouble. They were sold as a kind of medicinal brace, a way to support the body and promote good health through good posture. Of course, the practice was not without its critics. Just as the female corset was attacked by reformers, the male corset was frequently mocked in satirical cartoons. Cartoonists in magazines like Punch loved to depict dandies struggling to lace themselves up, their faces red with effort, often with the help of a long-suffering valet. The man who wore a corset was often portrayed as vain, over-minded, and overly concerned with his appearance. So while it was an accepted practice in some circles, it also carried a certain stigma, which is why it was often done discreetly. The advertisements for them would use masculine language, focusing on support, strength, and figure improvement, carefully avoiding the more feminine connotations of the word corset. And here's a curious detail that ties male and female corsetry together: the industry itself. The same companies that manufactured the hollowbone and Steele corsets for women often produced the male versions as well. They would advertise them in gentlemen's magazines and catalogues, right alongside shaving cream and boot polish. A catalogue from the 1892 might show a delicate, lace-trimmed corset for a lady on one page, and a sturdy, plain coat or body belt for a gentleman on the next. It was a thriving, if somewhat niche, market. The academic debate around male corsetry is fascinating. Historians are still trying to gauge just how common it really was. Since it was often a private matter, historical evidence can be scarce, but analysis of surviving garments, advertisements, and personal letters suggests it was more than just a passing fad for a tiny minority. The debate also explores what this says about Victorian masculinity. Does the existence of the male corset challenge our view of the Victorian man as rigidly masculine, or does it reinforce it? Some scholars argue that, far from being an act of effeminacy, wearing a corset was an act of supreme masculine self-discipline, molding the body to fit an ideal. Just as one would mold one's character, it was about control. You look at the man's impossibly trim waist one more time. It's a powerful illusion. An illusion of natural strength and effortless discipline, secretly engineered by a foundation garment identical in principle to the one currently squeezing your own ribs. It's a shared secret of suffering for fashion. A hidden bond of hollow bone and laces that crosses the gender divide of this strained, demanding era. You are both sculptures, carved into ideal forms by the invisible hand of society's expectations. You take a step back, mentally, and try to see the whole picture. You've examined the gentleman from his gleaming hair to his polished boots, from the cut of his coat to the secret of his corseted waist. Now, you assemble the pieces. You see him not as a collection of parts, but as a complete, cohesive image, the ideal Victorian gentleman. It's a portrait of control, prosperity, and unshakable respectability. His day began not with comfort, but with ritual. The cold water wash, the precise shave with a sharpened blade, the careful selection of clothes, each piece a signifier, the starched white shirt, a beacon of his cleanliness and financial standing, with a collar so stiff it forces his chin up, making him look the world directly in the eye. He is literally constrained by his respectability. His cravat is knotted just so, a small detail that speaks volumes to other men of his class. His body has been sculpted. Beneath his coat, the corset cinches his waist, creating a silhouette of youthful vitality and military discipline. Regardless of his actual age or physical condition, it forces him into a posture of perpetual alertness, projecting an aura of confidence and readiness. His coat, dark and sober, is tailored to perfection, emphasizing the broadness of his shoulders and the slimness of his corseted waist. It's the uniform of the new ruling class, the industrialist, the banker, the man of commerce. It's serious, it's powerful, and it's devoid of the flamboyant frivolity of the old aristocracy. His face is a carefully curated landscape. The beard and mustache, styled with waxes and oils, are not just hair, they are a proclamation of his masculinity, his maturity, and his adherence to the latest medical and social theories. His hair, thick with pomade, gleams under the gaslight, a picture of neatness and order. Not a single hair is out of place. This control over his own body is meant to mirror his control over his business, his household, and his emotions. Even his scent is a carefully chosen part of the ensemble, a subtle hint of bay rum or a woody cologne, enough to be pleasant but not so much as to be ostentatious. It's the smell of a man who is clean, prosperous, and in command of himself. Now for a slightly more abstract, but crucial, detail of this portrait: his hands. Like yours, they are likely gloved when he is outdoors. When ungloved, they would be expected to be clean, with trimmed nails. But like yours, they are not expected to be soft and idle. A gentleman's hands could show signs of thought. Ink stains on the fingers were often seen as a sign of a diligent professional or scholar, but not signs of manual labor. They were the hands of a man who worked with his mind, not his body. The historical debate around this perfect gentleman often revolves around the concept of self-made masculinity. The 19th century was an era of great social mobility, where a man from a relatively humble background could, through industry and intellect, rise to a position of wealth and influence. This ideal image, therefore, became a kind of aspirational blueprint. Historians argue whether this rigid code of appearance was a way for the new money to legitimize itself by adopting a uniform of respectability, or if it was a tool used by the established upper classes to maintain exclusivity, constantly shifting the subtle rules of dress and etiquette to keep newcomers off balance. It was likely both. You watch as he finally moves on, walking down the street with a confident, measured stride. His posture is unwavering, his silhouette sharp and defined against the misty gloom. He is a walking, breathing advertisement for the Victorian era's masculine ideals: discipline, prosperity, control, and a deep, abiding seriousness. His beauty is not one of softness or delicacy, but of structure, order, and precision. It is a beauty born of restraint and relentless self-monitoring. Seeing him in his entirety, you realize something profound. Your own beauty standard, with its emphasis on fragility, domesticity, and ornamental uselessness, is designed to be the perfect counterpart to his. Your paleness is the foil to his robust, bearded health. Your delicate idleness is the reward for his hard work in the cutthroat world of commerce. Your sprawling, impractical crinoline is balanced by his sleek, efficient suit. You are two halves of a whole, each sculpted by immense, though different, pressures. You are both living works of art, and living prisoners of the frame. And now, having understood the surface, it's time to look at the far more dangerous things people were willing to do to perfect the picture, the hidden poisons they consumed in the name of beauty. The gentleman disappears into the fog, and your attention is drawn to a different kind of shop window. This one isn't a tobacconist's or a tailor, it's a chemist's shop, or what we would call a pharmacy. The window is filled with large, elegant glass jars containing colored liquids and mysterious powders. Rows of neatly labeled wooden drawers line the walls inside, holding all manner of remedies, potions, and chemicals. This is the respectable, scientific face of medicine. But this is also the place where the pursuit of beauty takes a darker, more dangerous turn. You drift closer, peering at the labels on the boxes and bottles in the display. You see advertisements for Dr. Mackenzie's medicated arsenic soap, promising a clear and spotless complexion. Next to it might be a delicate, penescent lotion called Gorad's Oriental Cream, a magical beautifier that promises to remove any and all skin blemishes. What the label doesn't prominently advertise is that its active ingredient is mercuric chloride. You are looking at a shelf full of socially acceptable poisons. The Victorian era was a golden age for patent medicines and cosmetic preparations. With little to no government regulation, anyone could mix together a concoction, give it a fancy, scientific-sounding name, and sell it to a public desperate for cures and beauty aids. While some of these were harmless concoctions of herbs and alcohol, many contained active ingredients that were startlingly toxic. Arsenic, lead, mercury, and ammonia were common. You might see a product called Fowler's Solution being sold. This was a well-known medicinal tonic, prescribed by doctors for everything from asthma to rheumatism. Its main ingredient was potassium arsenite, but women quickly discovered that taking small, sublethal doses of Fowler's solution had a curious side effect. It would clear up acne and create a pale, waxy, and oddly luminous complexion. So they started secretly sipping this arsenic solution, not as a medicine, but as a beauty treatment. Next to it, you might see Milk of Roses, a popular skin lotion. Some versions were harmless, but many were based on lead acetate. These lead-based lotions were effective at whitening the skin and covering blemishes. But the lead would be slowly absorbed into the bloodstream, leading to long-term poisoning. The symptoms were horrific tremors, weight loss, paralysis, and eventually, a painful death. And then there were the hair products. While some pomades were just lard, others were more sinister. To combat grey hair, men and women would use hair restorers that promised to bring back their natural color. Many of these worked by using a combination of lead acetate and sulfur. When applied to the hair, these chemicals would react and deposit a dark layer of lead sulfide on the hair shaft, gradually darkening it. Of course, this meant the user was applying a lead solution directly to their scalp every single day. Here's a particularly strange and illustrative tidbit: the dual nature of these poisons. Arsenic was, at the same time, a popular beauty aid, a medicine, a common rat poison widely available for purchase, and the preferred murder weapon in many sensational crime stories of the era. A woman could buy arsenic from her chemist to clear up her complexion, while her husband might buy the exact same substance from the same shop to deal with a rodent problem in the cellar. This casual availability and multifaceted use of deadly poisons is something that is hard for us to comprehend today. It speaks to a very different relationship with chemistry and mortality. The historical debate here is a contentious one. To what extent were Victorian women and men aware of the dangers they were courting? The traditional view holds that they were largely ignorant victims, duped by snake oil salesmen and a medical establishment that didn't fully understand toxicology. However, more recent scholarship suggests a more complicated picture. The dangers of substances like lead and arsenic were not a complete secret. There were articles in medical journals and even some newspapers warning of the potential for poisoning. This leads to the more unsettling argument that at least some users were aware of the risks, or at least the rumors, but chose to use the products anyway. They were willing to gamble with their long-term health for the short-term social and romantic benefits of a flawless complexion. It was a high-stakes trade-off, driven by the immense pressure to conform to an impossible beauty standard. The question of what did they know, and when did they know it is still actively debated by historians. You look at the chemist's glowing window, a beacon of modern science and commerce. It promises health. It promises beauty. It promises perfection in a bottle. But for those in the know, it's a menu of slow poisons. It's the dark, hidden underbelly of the Victorian beauty quest. And among all these dangerous products, one practice stands out as perhaps the most bizarre and horrifying of them all. A trend that took the idea of ingesting poison for beauty to its most literal and extreme conclusion. Your gaze drifts from the topical lotions and soaps in the chemist's window to a small, discreet-looking tin box. It's not flashy. It looks almost like a box of mints or small candies. The label might read something like Dr. Campbell's Arsenic Complexion Wafers or simply celebrated Styrian Complexion Wafers. Inside this unassuming box lies the most direct and dangerous beauty secret of the era: pure, unadulterated arsenic, packaged for consumption. This is the heart of the arsenic eating, or Arsenic-Eaters phenomenon. It wasn't just about using arsenic in a soap or a lotion, it was about deliberately eating it. The practice is thought to have originated in the rural region of Styria, in Austria, where for centuries, some peasants had been known to consume arsenic. They believed it helped them breathe in the thin mountain air and gave them a robust, healthy appearance. This local folk practice was discovered by doctors and travelers in the mid-19th century, sensationalized in medical journals, and the fad soon spread across Europe and America. The product in the window, the arsenic wafer, was the commercialized, supposedly safe version of this practice. These were small wafers or pills containing a tiny, carefully measured dose of white arsenic dry escaped. They were marketed directly to women as the ultimate secret to a perfect complexion. The advertisements were seductive, promising that the wafers would produce a clear, blooming complexion, remove pimples, freckles, and all eruptions of the skin, and give the user a transparently beautiful appearance. So you would buy this tin, and in the privacy of your own home, you would begin the process. You'd start by taking a very small piece of a wafer, perhaps twice a week. The arsenic works in a truly insidious way. In small doses, it kills red blood cells and irritates the stomach lining. This destruction of blood cells creates a ghostly pallor, the coveted pale skin. The irritation, meanwhile, causes a slight swelling in the subcutaneous tissues of the face, which smooths out wrinkles and creates a plump, youthful look. It also gives the eyes a strange, brilliant sparkle, a side effect of the poison's impact on the nervous system. You would look in the mirror after a few weeks and see exactly what was promised. Your skin would be clearer, paler. You would look luminous, ethereal. Your friends might compliment you on how well you look. And so, you would continue, feeling that you had discovered a magical secret. The problem is, arsenic is not only a poison, it is also highly addictive. Here's a particularly chilling detail about the process. The body builds up a tolerance to arsenic. This means that to maintain the same cosmetic effect, you would need to gradually increase your dose. A dose that would be fatal to a beginner becomes a regular maintenance dose for a habitual user. The Arsenic-Eaters of Styria were reportedly able to consume amounts of arsenic daily that would kill several people instantly. This terrifying tolerance created a trap. Once you started, it was incredibly difficult to stop. The practice existed in a strange twilight of legality and social acceptance. While arsenic was a known poison, these complexion wafers were sold relatively openly. They occupied a grey area, much like diet pills or unproven supplements today. They were presented as a cosmetic aid, not a drug. A woman could purchase them without a prescription and without undue suspicion. The historical debate around arsenic eating is intense. For a long time, some historians questioned whether the practice was ever truly widespread or if it was just a sensationalized myth, a kind of urban legend exaggerated by a yellow press eager for shocking stories. They pointed to the lack of hard data and the folklore-like origins of the stories. However, the sheer volume of advertisements for arsenic wafers, the numerous mentions in medical journals both condemning and sometimes cautiously studying the practice, and personal accounts found in letters and diaries have led most modern historians to agree that it was very real. The debate now focuses more on how widespread it was. Was it a niche practice among a few daring women, or a more common, if well hidden, habit? You look back at the innocent-looking tin box. It represents the absolute zenith of the Victorian obsession with appearance. It's the point where the desire for a specific look, the pale, fragile, luminous ideal becomes so powerful that you are willing to literally consume a deadly poison to achieve it. It is the ultimate triumph of surface over substance, of appearance over health, and the allure is powerful, but the price for this perfect complexion is a debt that your body will eventually have to pay, one way or another. You continue to stare at the small tin of arsenic wafers, imagining the process. You start your regimen, and the initial results are intoxicating. Your skin, once perhaps prone to a healthy flush or a few minor blemishes, transforms. It becomes smooth, opalescent, like fine porcelain. Your eyes, as promised, seem to sparkle with a new, mysterious light. You receive compliments. You feel beautiful, fashionable, and in control of your appearance in a way you never have before. This is the allure of arsenic. It delivers on its promise. But beneath the surface, a sinister transaction is taking place. As you continue to take the wafers, perhaps upping the dose slightly to maintain that perfect pallor, your body begins to change in other, less beautiful ways. You might start to feel a persistent, low-grade nausea. You might notice a strange, garlicky odor on your breath and skin, a telltale sign of arsenic poisoning. Your hair and fingernails, which you've so carefully tended, might become brittle. White bands, known as maze lines, might start to appear across your nails, a classic symptom of arsenic exposure. This is the addictive nature of the poison taking hold. Not necessarily a psychological craving, but a physical dependency. If you try to stop, if you miss a dose or decide the side effects are too worrying, you face the horror of withdrawal. And arsenic withdrawal is not a gentle process. The beautifying effects vanish with terrifying speed. The swelling in your face subsides. But it doesn't just return to normal, it leaves your skin looking sallow and sunken. The luminous pallor is replaced by a blotchy, unhealthy complexion, often with a greyish or bronze tint. The sparkle in your eyes disappears, leaving them dull and lifeless. The physical symptoms of withdrawal are even worse. You would experience severe abdominal cramps, vomiting, and diarrhea. Your nervous system, so long suppressed by the poison, would rebel, causing tremors, muscle weakness, and intense anxiety. In short, stopping makes you look and feel far worse than you did before you ever started. You are trapped. To continue is to slowly poison yourself. To stop is to face an immediate and horrifying physical and aesthetic collapse. Many women, faced with this choice, chose to continue. convinced it was the lesser of two evils. Here's a small, grim detail that highlights the pervasiveness of this poison in Victorian life arsenic testing. As public awareness of arsenic's dual role as a beauty aid and a murder weapon grew, forensic science began to develop new methods to detect it. The Marsh test, developed in the 1830s, was a highly sensitive chemical test that could detect minute traces of arsenic in food, mortar, or human tissue. This test became famous in sensational murder trials, where a scientist could prove, often with great courtroom drama, that a victim had been poisoned. The strange irony is that the same test could have been used on a perfectly healthy-looking arsenic-eater, and it would have revealed that she was, in effect, slowly murdering herself for a better complexion. The long-term consequences, for those who continued the practice, were bleak. Chronic arsenic exposure leads to a host of catastrophic health problems. It damages the liver and kidneys. It causes severe nerve damage, leading to numbness, tingling, and eventually paralysis in the hands and feet. It dramatically increases the risk of developing cancers of the skin, lung, and bladder. The beautiful, pale skin they sought would often, over time, become mottled with dark spots and cancerous lesions. The very thing they were trying to perfect was what the poison would ultimately destroy. The historical debate here is a poignant one, focusing on victimhood and agency. Were the women who engaged in arsenic eating simply foolish, vain victims of fraudulent advertising, or was their choice a more complex, rational if desperate act within a society that placed such an immense value on female beauty? Some social historians argue that in a world where a woman's primary path to security and social mobility was through marriage, her appearance was her most valuable asset. Improving that asset, even at great personal risk, could be seen as a calculated investment in her future. This perspective doesn't condone the practice, but it seeks to understand the immense social pressures that would make such a dangerous gamble seem like a viable option. You turn away from the chemist's window, a chill running down your spine that has nothing to do with the damp night air. The story of the arsenic wafer is the story of a beauty standard so toxic that it demanded a literal poison to achieve it. It's a tragic spiral where the quest for a superficial, fleeting beauty leads to an inescapable reality of addiction and decay. It's the ultimate expression of a culture that taught women that their surface was more valuable than their health, their future, and even their life. And arsenic wasn't the only poison lurking in the Victorian woman's makeup bag. You move on from the chemist's shop, but the memory of those dangerous potions lingers. You think about the quest for beauty, and how every part of the face was scrutinized. You've considered the skin, the canvas itself. But what about the features? What about the eyes in the soft, flickering gaslight of the era? A woman's eyes held a particular power. They were the windows to the soul, and making those windows appear as large, dark, and expressive as possible was another key goal in the beauty arms race. For this, Victorian women turned to another plant from nature's poison cabinet, Atropa belladonna. The name itself is a hint. Belladonna is Italian for beautiful woman. The plant, also known as deadly nightshade, produces berries and leaves that contain a potent alkaloid called atropine. For centuries, women had known that a tidy, carefully prepared drop of belladonna extract, when applied directly to the eye, would have a dramatic effect. You can imagine the scene. A woman sits at her vanity table before a bowl. She takes out a small, dark blue glass bottle with a delicate dropper. She carefully squeezes a single drop of the belladonna solution into each of her eyes. It stings for a moment. Then, over the next few minutes, the magic happens. The atropine works by blocking the nerve receptors in the iris muscles, the ones that control the constriction of the pupil. With these muscles paralyzed, her pupils dilate, widening until the dark center of her eye nearly swallows the colored iris. The effect is striking. Her eyes appear huge, dark, and luminous. They take on a dreamy, slightly unfocused, and intensely romantic gaze. In the low light of a ballroom, where pupils would naturally be somewhat dilated anyway, this effect would be magnified. giving her an air of mysterious, wide-eyed beauty. It was a look that was considered deeply alluring and fashionable. It suggested a sensitive, artistic soul, perhaps a little bit melancholy, a little bit overwhelmed by the world, all very desirable traits in the angel in the house. But this beautiful gaze came at a steep price. The most immediate and obvious side effect is that it completely blurs your vision. By forcing the pupil wide open, belladonna prevents the eye from focusing properly. The woman who used it would be walking around in a soft focus world, unable to see clearly, especially up close. She might struggle to read her unscarred, to recognize a face across the room, or even to navigate a crowded space without a slight stumble. This cultivated helplessness, this self-inflicted vulnerability, was, in a twisted way, part of the appeal. It made her seem more delicate and in need of a gentleman's assistance. And here's a rather alarming little detail about the practice. Belladonna wasn't just some obscure, back-alley substance. While it was a known poison, extracts were sold by chemists and were even prescribed by ophthalmologists for legitimate medical examinations, a practice that continues today. This medical legitimacy gave its cosmetic use of an air of safety. A woman could purchase it under the guise of having a weakness of the eyes or some other vague complaint. This put it in the same category as the arsenic wafers, a dangerous substance hiding in plain sight. Its risks downplayed for the sake of fashion. Repeated, long-term use of belladonna was incredibly dangerous. It could lead to a permanent sensitivity to light, photophobia, as the pupils could no longer constrict to protect the retina. It could cause severe eye irritation, inflammation, and even increase the pressure within the eyeball, potentially contributing to glaucoma and, in a tragic irony, eventual blindness, and of course, being a poison. If too much was absorbed through the tear ducts into the bloodstream, or if it was accidentally ingested, it could cause systemic poisoning, a racing heart, a dry mouth, confusion, hallucinations, and in a high enough dose, death. The historical debate around belladonna use is similar to that of arsenic. Skeptics question how common it really was, suggesting it might be another one of those sensationalized Victorian beauty myths. However, mentions in beauty guides of the era, coupled with accounts in medical literature warning against the practice, provide strong evidence that it was a known, if risky, beauty hack for those in the know. Historians who study the material culture of the period also point to the common availability of the distinctive blue glass bottles used to store poisons like belladonna and laudanum, suggesting these substances were a regular feature in many middle and upper class homes. You blink, and the world comes back into sharp focus. The thought of deliberately blurring your own vision for the sake of a fashionable gaze is unsettling. It's a powerful metaphor for the era's beauty standards. To be beautiful, you had to be willing to not see the world clearly. You had to sacrifice your own perception, your own focus, for the sake of how you were perceived by others. It was another act of self-sabotage in the name of beauty, another piece of the puzzle that reveals a culture willing to risk health, sight, and even life for a fleeting, fashionable ideal. Having contemplated the poisons women willingly put in their bodies, you now turn your thoughts back to the things they put on them. You think back to the ideal of the pale, flawless complexion, while sun avoidance, gentle bleaches, and even arsenic could help. They didn't offer a quick fix. They couldn't cover a sudden blemish, that birthmark, or the natural ruddiness of a healthy face. For that, you needed something more direct. You needed a cosmetic foundation. And in the Victorian era, the most effective and most dangerous option was lead. You imagine a woman preparing for an evening out. On her vanity, next to the bottle of belladonna, might be a small porcelain pot of face powder or a thick, creamy enamel. The product might be called Laird's Bloom of Youth or Laientephilique Anti-Freckle Melt. These products promise to bestow a perfect, matte, porcelain white finish to the skin, instantly erasing all imperfections. The secret to their incredible coverage was their primary ingredient, lead carbonate, also known as white lead. This was not a new invention. Lead-based cosmetics have been used since ancient times. Queen Elizabeth I was famous for her lead-caked mask of youth, but the Victorians, with their burgeoning chemical industry, perfected and commercialized it. The lead powder was ground incredibly fine, giving it a smooth, silky texture that adhered beautifully to the skin. It was far superior to safer alternatives like rice powder or zinc oxide in terms of its opacity and staying power. It worked, and it worked brilliantly. So the woman would take a soft powder puff and gently apply the lead-based powder all over her face, her neck, and her décolletage, carefully blending it to create a seamless, statue-like complexion. The immediate effect was stunning. She would look flawless, ethereal, her skin a perfect, unblemished canvas. But with every application, she was applying a layer of heavy metal poison directly to her skin. The lead is slowly absorbed through the pores, entering the bloodstream and beginning its insidious work on the body. The symptoms of chronic lead poisoning, or plumism, are slow to develop but relentless. At first, she might experience fatigue, irritability, and a persistent metallic taste in her mouth. As the lead builds up in her tissues, more severe symptoms appear. She would suffer from intense abdominal pain, known as lead colic. Her nervous system would begin to fail, leading to tremors, weakness in her wrists and ankles, a condition known as wrist drop, and eventually, paralysis. It also attacks the brain, causing memory loss, confusion, and lead encephalopathy, a condition that could lead to seizures and death. Here is a truly horrifying, granular detail about the process. Lead poisoning also caused the gums to rot and turn black, creating a dark line along the teeth known as a Burton's line. In a cruel twist, the very substance a woman used to make her face look beautiful and pale would cause her teeth and gums to decay from the inside out. Furthermore, the lead itself would damage the skin over time, causing it to dry out, wrinkle, and take on a grayish, lifeless cast. This, of course, would compel the woman to apply even more of the lead powder to cover up the damage being caused by the product itself, creating a vicious cycle of cosmetic destruction. The historical debate around the use of lead cosmetics in the 19th century is vigorous. As mentioned before, the public ideal was one of natural beauty, and overt makeup was frowned upon. Many historians argue that because of this, the use of heavy lead enamels was likely confined to a small, daring subset of women, perhaps those in fast society or the theatrical world. They suggest that the average, respectable middle-class woman would have avoided such painted looks. However, other historians push back against this, arguing that the line between a lotion and a paint was deliberately blurry. Products containing lead were often marketed as medicinal skin treatments or tonics, allowing respectable women to use them while maintaining plausible deniability. The sheer number of these products available for sale, and the frequent warnings about their dangers in medical literature, suggest that their use was more widespread than the respectable public image of the Victorian lady would have us believe. The question of who was using these products and how they justified it to themselves remains a key point of discussion. You shudder to think of it. The woman with the perfect porcelain face at the bowl, admired by all for her flawless complexion, is slowly poisoning herself. The mask of beauty she presents to the world is literally killing her. Lead, like arsenic and belladonna, was another one of fashion's fortune bargains. It offered immediate, unparalleled cosmetic results, but the long-term cost was disease, disfigurement, and a painful, early death. It was the price of perfection in a world that demanded it above all else. Your walk through this foggy Victorian night has become a tour of a hidden chemical landscape. Arsenic, belladonna, lead, mercury. These weren't obscure substances. They were consumer products. And how does a consumer product become popular through advertising? You stop in front of a newsstand. The paper's held down by a brick against the damp breeze. You pick one up, the ink still smelling fresh, as you flip through the dense columns of text about politics and shipping news. you find what you're looking for: the ads. The advertising section of a Victorian newspaper is a wild, unregulated marketplace of miracle cures and magical transformations. It's here that the dangerous beauty products you've been learning about were normalized and pushed onto a hopeful public. The advertisements are masterpieces of persuasion, using a combination of scientific-sounding language, emotional appeals, and unverifiable testimonials to sell their toxic wares. You see an ad for Drive Rose's Arsenic Complexion wafers. It doesn't scream poison. Instead, it might feature an elegant line drawing of a beautiful, wistful-looking woman with perfect skin. The text is calm and reassuring. It speaks of the famous Styrian beauties and their legendary complexions, attributing their allure to the geological peculiarities of their native soil, a delicate euphemism for the arsenic in the ground. The ad promises to purify the blood and impart a marble-like purity to the skin. It uses medical jargon, speaking of humors and systemic purification, to give itself an air of scientific legitimacy. The word poison is, of course, nowhere to be found. Next to it is an advertisement for lead-based enamel, perhaps the princess's secret bloom. The ad copy is pure romance. Do you wish to captivate, to turn heads in the ballroom, to possess a complexion that rivals the lily? It speaks directly to the user's social anxieties and romantic aspirations. It might include a testimonial from a lady of quality in Belgravia. Your bloom is a marvel. My husband has never found me more lovely. These testimonials were almost certainly fabricated by the company, but they created a powerful sense of social proof. This is where you encounter the figure of the quack or the patent medicine king. These were savvy, often ruthless entrepreneurs who understood psychology far better than they understood chemistry. Men like William B. Meh, who marketed Laird's Bloom of Youth, or the mysterious Madame Rachel Leverson, who ran a high-end beauty salon in London, were experts at exploitation. Madame Rachel, for example, would charge aristocratic clients exorbitant fees for secret treatments, including her magnetic rock dew water of the Sahara, which was basically just scented water. She famously blackmailed her wealthy clients, threatening to expose the fact that they painted their faces if they didn't continue to pay her. Here's a specific, telling detail about these advertisements: the use of fear. Many ads didn't just sell beauty, they sold fear of ugliness. An ad for a head I wouldn't just promise to cover grey, it would paint a grim picture of the social isolation and loss of affection that awaited anyone with greying hair. An ad for a pimple cream would describe acne not as a minor skin complaint, but as a disfiguring disease that would make one a social outcast. They preyed on the deepest insecurities of the age, and then offered a simple, affordable solution in a bottle. The historical debate about this advertising is fascinating. To what extent did these ads create the beauty standards? And to what extent did they simply reflect and exploit existing ones? Most historians agree it was a feedback loop. The culture created the desire for a pale complexion, and advertisers seized upon it. Then, by constantly bombarding the public with images of this ideal and promises of achieving it, they reinforced and amplified the standard, making it seem even more essential and attainable. They were both a mirror and an engine of the culture's obsessions. The question of culpability is also debated. Were these advertisers cynical charlatans who knew their products were dangerous? Or were some of them genuine believers in their own concoctions? Operating in an era of limited scientific understanding, the truth is likely a mix of both. You put the newspaper down, the bold-faced lies of the advertisement still ringing in your mind. This was the engine that drove the whole dangerous enterprise. It was a constant, persuasive whisper in the ear of the Victorian consumer, telling them they were not good enough as they were, but that perfection was just one purchase away. These ads normalized the abnormal. They made the idea of eating arsenic or painting your face with lead seem not just acceptable, but illogical, even necessary, step in the pursuit of beauty and social success. They were the friendly, smiling face of a very poisonous industry. You move away from the newsstand and the clamor of its advertisements, turning your steps towards a different part of the city. The fog seems to thin a little here, and the oppressive grandeur of the stone townhouses gives way to narrower streets lined with more modest, tightly packed brick buildings. The air smells different, to less of horse manure and more of boiled cabbage and damp laundry. You have crossed an invisible but powerful line. You are now in a working-class neighborhood, and the beauty standards you've been observing are about to refract through the prism of poverty. The ideal of beauty, the pale skin, the delicate hands, the elaborate hair was a luxury good. It was a product of leisure and wealth, for the women you see here, rushing along the pavement with baskets on their arms, their faces etched with weariness. That ideal is a distant, impossible fantasy. A woman emerges from a doorway, wiping her hands on her apron. Her skin is not fashionably pale, it's weathered by the sun from hanging laundry in a small yard, and chapped from the harsh soap used for scrubbing floors. Her hands are not soft and white, they are red, callous, and strong. They are the hands of a worker, and they are a clear, undeniable sign of her class. She cannot afford the luxury of idleness. Her figure is not the delicate, considered dress, while she might wear a cheap, mass-produced corset for Sunday best to mimic the fashionable silhouette for her daily work. Such a restrictive garment would be a dangerous incontinence. She needs to be able to bend, to lift, to scrub. Her body is a tool for labor, not an object for display. Her clothing is practical, made of sturdy, dark-colored wool or cotton that won't show the dirt easily. She is not encased in a crinoline. She might wear a simple bustle pad to give her skirt some shape, but nothing that would get caught in a doorway or be a fire hazard near her cooking stove. Even her hair, while likely pinned up and out of her face for practical reasons, would not be the elaborate, time-consuming coiffure of a lady. She doesn't have the time, nor a lady's maid, to create intricate braids and coils. Her hairstyle is one of necessity, meant to be secure and out of the way. But this does not mean that working-class women had no beauty standards or were uninterested in their appearance. They had their own distinct culture of beauty, one based on realism and resourcefulness. A working-class woman might not be able to afford Dr. Rose's arsenic wafers, but she knew that a pinch of beetroot could bring a bit of color to her cheeks and lips for a night out at the local pub or dance hall. She might use a bit of soot mixed with grease to darken her eyelashes, a trick passed down through generations. Her cosmetics were homemade, cheap, and often derived from household items. Here's a small, poignant detail that illustrates this class divide in beauty. For a wealthy lady, the freckle was a flaw, a sign of sun exposure to be bleached away. For a working-class girl, a freckle was simply a part of her face. The obsession with erasing these imperfections was a concern for those who had the time and money to worry about such things. The beauty culture of the working class was less about achieving an impossible, artificial ideal and more about looking smart, tidy, and respectable within the constraints of their world. A clean apron, a neatly pinned-up hairstyle, and a healthy, natural flush from work. Not a bottle were the markers of pride and self-respect. The historical debate here often revolves around the idea of trickle-down fashion. The traditional model suggests that fashion and beauty ideals start in the upper classes and gradually trickle down to the lower classes in cheaper, simplified forms. For example, the wealthy lady's crinoline becomes the housemaid's single Steele who, however, some social historians challenge this, arguing that working-class communities also had their own internally generated styles and standards. They point to the distinct fashions of specific groups, like the costermonger street sellers of London with their pearly buttons, as evidence of a vibrant, independent working-class aesthetic. The argument continues: was working-class beauty simply a pale imitation of upper-class ideals? Or was it a separate and resilient culture of its own? You see a group of young factory girls walking arm in arm down the street, laughing loudly. Their clothes are simple, but they've added their own small flourishes, a brightly colored ribbon in their hair, a cheap brooch pinned to their soul. They are not the angels in the house. They are not pale, silent, and fragile. They are vibrant, noisy, and alive in a way that the constrained ladies of the upper-class world are not. Their beauty is one of vitality and resilience, not of delicacy and leisure. It's a completely different language of appearance, one dictated not by Punch magazine or Parisian fashion plates, but by the harsh, unyielding realities of economic survival. It's a sobering reminder that in the Victorian era, as in so many others, beauty was not a universal standard, but a privilege of the few. Your journey through the city has shown you the living, breathing performance of Victorian beauty, the cages, the poisons, the relentless effort. But now, you feel a pull towards a quieter, more somber side of this obsession. The fog seems to grow thicker again as you find yourself in front of a handsome, respectable-looking townhouse. The curtains are drawn, and a black wreath hangs on the front door. This is a house of mourning, and it's here, in the presence of death, that the Victorian obsession with appearance takes its most peculiar and poignant turn. You step inside, not into a scene of chaotic grief, but into one of hushed, highly ritualized order. The air is heavy with the scent of lilies and beeswax. The family, dressed head to toe in somber black, moves with a kind of choreographed gravity. The Victorian era, with its high mortality rates, particularly among children, had a relationship with death that was both intimate and deeply theatrical. And a central part of this theater was ensuring that the deceased had a good death and, just as importantly, made a beautiful corpse. The ideal was for the departed to look as if they were peacefully sleeping. This was not just for the comfort of the grieving family. It was seen as a sign that the soul had departed in a state of grace. Achieving this look required a significant amount of post-mortem intervention. The body would be washed, and the hair carefully styled, often in the person's favorite manner. To a woman, her hair might be arranged just as she would have worn it for a special occasion. For a child, their curls might be carefully arranged on the pillow. The body would then be dressed in its best clothes. This wasn't a shroud, but often a favorite dress or a smart suit. For a young, unmarried woman, it was a tragic custom to be buried in a white dress, as if she were a bride. The goal was to present an image not of sickness and death, but of peaceful, eternal rest. But the real work was in the face. The waxy pallor of death was, ironically, not far from the fashionable pallor of the living. However, undertakers and family members would often go further. To counteract the sunken, hollow look that can accompany death, they would use subtle techniques to create an illusion of life. A small amount of cotton wadding might be placed inside the cheeks to give them a fuller, more rounded appearance. The lips, which can turn blue or pale, might be touched with a faint hint of carmine to give them a lifelike, rosy tint. The skin might be dusted with a fine powder to give it a smooth, uniform texture. Here's a small, specific detail that captures the intensity of this practice. To keep the eyes and mouth gently closed in a serene expression, a variety of methods were used. A coin or a small weight might be placed on each eyelid to keep the jaw from sagging. A handkerchief might be tied around the head, under the chin, and over the crown, a detail often seen in illustrations from the period. Sometimes, a special wire contraption, hidden from view, would be used to hold the jaw in place from within. Every effort was made to erase the grim realities of death and replace them with a peaceful, aesthetically pleasing tableau. The historical debate around these practices often centers on their psychological purpose. Was this all for the dead? Or was it really for the living? Many historians argue that these rituals were a vital part of the grieving process. In an age before modern grief counseling, the act of preparing the body, of making the deceased look beautiful and at peace, was a way for the family to actively care for their loved one last time. It was a final act of love and service, a way to impose order and beauty on the chaos and pain of loss. Other scholars, however, see it as a manifestation of Victorian denial, an attempt to beautify and domesticate death to such an extent that its terrifying reality was masked. Was it a healthy coping mechanism or a profound form of avoidance? You look at the figure laid out in the coffin in the center of the parlor, surrounded by flowers, dressed in fine clothes, the face artfully composed into an expression of serene slumber. The person looks almost impossibly peaceful. It is the final, and perhaps ultimate, performance of Victorian beauty, an appearance so carefully constructed that attempts to triumph over death itself. It is a testament to an era so deeply invested in the power of the image that it ought to control it even beyond the grave, and this obsession with capturing one perfect, final image would lead to one of the most haunting and unique art forms of the 19th century. You leave the hushed atmosphere of the mourning house and find yourself back on the street. Your mind is still on that final, peaceful image of the deceased. In an age before everyone carried a camera in their pocket, how could a family preserve that carefully constructed memory? A painted portrait was an option, but it was expensive, time-consuming, and relied on the artist's interpretation. But the Victorian era was also the dawn of a new technology, one that promised a perfect, truthful image photography. And so, you find yourself drawn to the window of a photographer's studio, where this new science would intersect with the old rituals of death in a practice known as post-mortem photography. It sounds morbid to our modern sensibilities, but in the 19th century, commissioning a photograph of a deceased loved one was a common, and often comforting, practice for many families, particularly those of modest means. This single post-mortem photograph might be the only photograph they ever had of their child or family member. Photography was still a relatively new and expensive process, and people didn't have casual snapshots of everyday life. A death in the family was a major, if tragic, event, and it prompted the desire to capture a final, lasting likeness before the person was gone forever. You step into the photographer's studio. It's a small, cottage room that smells of strange chemicals, silver nitrate and collodion. There's a large, bulky wooden camera on a tripod, facing a backdrop painted with a pastoral scene. The photographer, a man with ink-stained fingers and a serious demeanor, might greet you. He is a craftsman, a scientist, and, in a way, a grief counselor. He understands the delicate nature of his work. The process itself was solemn. The photographer would often be called to the home of the deceased, where the body was still laid out. He would set up his equipment in the parlor, near a window to get the best natural light. The family would have already prepared their loved one, dressing them in their finest clothes and starting their hair. Just as you saw in the House of Mourning, the goal of the photographer was not to create a shocking or morbid image, but a respectful and sentimental one. The most common and poignant subjects of these photographs were infants and young children. The infant mortality rate was tragically high, and a post-mortem photograph was a tangible memento for grieving parents to hold on to. The child would often be photographed in their crib or on a sofa, surrounded by their favorite toys, posed as if they were merely sleeping. Sometimes, the mother or father would be in the photograph as well, holding their child one last time, their faces etched with a profound and stoic grief. Here's a small, heartbreaking detail of the craft. Early photographic processes, like the daguerreotype, required very long exposure times, sometimes several minutes. This meant that for a normal portrait, the living subject had to sit perfectly still to avoid a blurry image. The grim, practical advantage of post-mortem photography was that the subject was perfectly, tragically still. This often resulted in the deceased person being the sharpest, clearest figure in the photograph, while their living family members might be slightly blurred from their own breathing or subtle movements. A haunting visual reversal. The historical debate around post-mortem photography often touches on our changing relationship with death. To us, the practice seems unsettling, even taboo. Why would anyone want a picture of a dead person? But historians argue that this reaction is a modern one. The Victorians lived with death on a daily basis. It was not hidden away in hospitals and funeral homes. It was a part of domestic life. For them, a post-mortem photograph was not about celebrating death, but about preserving the memory of life. It was an act of remembrance, not of morbidity. Some scholars also argue that these photos were a way to prove the existence of a child who lived only a short time, giving them a permanent place in the family history. As you look at the sample photographs displayed in the studio, a daguerreotype in a small, velvet-lined case. A card visit on a piece of cardstock. You see the faces. A baby with its eyes gently closed. A young woman reclining on a chaise lounge. They are treated with dignity and love. These are not ghoulish images, they are deeply human artifacts of loss. They represent the intersection of a new technology and an ancient human need, the desire to remember. But the quest for the perfect final image didn't always stop at just a peaceful, sleeping pose. Sometimes, the photographers and the families went even further, into a realm of truly uncanny illusion. Your attention is drawn to a particular photograph on the studio wall. It's a family portrait. A father stands sternly, his hand on his wife's shoulder. The mother is seated, and next to her stands a young girl, perhaps 8 or 9 years old. Her dress is neat. Her hair is tidy. But there's something strange about her. Her posture is a little too rigid. Her gaze is a little too fixed. And her eyes. They seem to have been painted directly onto the photographic print. Given an artificial, wide-open stare, you are looking at a more elaborate, and arguably more unsettling, form of post-mortem photography, the attempt to make the dead appear lifelike. While many post-mortem photos depicted the deceased in a state of peaceful sleep, a significant subset aimed for a far more startling illusion. The goal was to photograph the departed loved one as if they were still alive, participating in one final family portrait. This required an extraordinary amount of artifice, both from the family and the photographer. The photographer's studio was equipped with a secret tool for these sessions, the posing stand. This was a heavy, cast iron contraption with a base and an adjustable vertical rod. At the top was a clamp, like a small fork, which could be hidden behind the subject's head, under their collar. This stand would hold the body upright, securing the head and torso in a rigid, lifelike pose. For a seated portrait, other braces might be used to position the arms and legs. The deceased was, quite literally, propped up for their final photo call. The family would work with the photographer to create the scene. The departed child might be posed with their favorite doll or seated in a chair next to their living siblings. The illusion was a collaborative effort. In the resulting photograph, it can be incredibly difficult for an untrained modern eye to tell who is living and who is deceased. The clues are subtle, the unnerving stillness, the slight awkwardness of the pose held by the stand, the lack of motion blur compared to the living subjects. But the most common and haunting intervention was done to the eyes. In a sleeping pose, closed eyes were natural, but for a living pose, they presented a problem. The eyes of the deceased are often sunken and closed. To counteract this, photographers developed techniques. The first, and more common, was post-production tinting. After the photograph was developed, a delicate tint would be applied to the person's cheeks to give them a rosy glow. And most strikingly, the photographer or a miniature artist painter would carefully paint pupils onto the closed eyelids of the deceased on the final print or daguerreotype plate, creating an eerie, doll-like, wide-eyed stare. The second method is the subject of some debate, but is a truly macabre detail. There are accounts, though they are difficult to definitively prove, of photographers using special props curved, wire-mounted eye caps with pupils painted on them that could be placed over the deceased's closed eyes to create the illusion of being open during the exposure itself. This practice of creating a living portrait of the dead reveals something profound about the Victorian psyche. It's an almost desperate attempt to deny the finality of death, to have one last image of the family unit, whole and unbroken. It's a photograph of a wish, not a reality. The historical debate around these specific photos is particularly intense. Many of these eyes-painted open photos have circulated on the internet, often with the caption, "Can you spot the dead person in this Victorian photo?" This has led to a great deal of misinformation, with people incorrectly identifying living subjects with stiff postures as the deceased. Forensic historians and photography experts now spend a great deal of time carefully analyzing these images, trying to separate myth from reality. The consensus is that, while the practice was real, it may not have been as common as modern internet lore suggests. The debate continues over the interpretation: was this a beautiful, comforting fiction for the family, or a deeply unsettling denial of reality that speaks to a culture terrified of letting go? You look at the family on the wall. The living parents. Their faces are masks of stoic grief, or embracing a fiction. They are pretending, for the duration of the camera's long exposure, that their daughter is still with them. The resulting photograph is a powerful, heartbreaking artifact. It's a testament to their love and their loss. But it is also the absolute peak of the Victorian obsession with appearance, a moment where the desire for a perfect image is so strong that it is willing to prop up, pose, and paint the dead to achieve it. It is the ultimate illusion, a carefully constructed lie to ward off an unbearable truth. You step out of the photographer's studio. The haunting image of that propped-up girl seared into your mind. The damp, foggy air of the Victorian street feels different now. It's no longer just a backdrop, it feels like a veil. A physical manifestation of the layers of illusion you've been uncovering all night. Everything you have seen: the corset, the arsenic, the hairpieces, the male girdle, the nail, the post-corpse, all points to a single, overwhelming conclusion. In this world, appearance is not just important, it is everything. It is, in many cases, more real and more valuable than reality itself. This is the grand, unifying theme of the Victorian beauty standard. It's a culture of the facade. The ideal woman's body is not her real body. It's a sculpted illusion created by a hollow-bone cage. Her perfect posture is not a sign of her own strength, but a result of being propped up by that same cage. Her flawless, pale skin is not a sign of health, but a carefully maintained shield against the sun, often enhanced with poisons that are actively destroying her health. Her voluminous hair is bulked up with the hair of strangers or animals. Her natural, rosy glow is a fiction painted on with secret cosmetics. Her entire being is a performance of an ideal that has little to do with the flesh and blood woman underneath. The ideal man, too, is a construct. His image of discipline and natural authority is cinched into place with a hidden corset. His masculine virility is proclaimed by facial hair that is waxed and oiled like a piece of decorative art. His air of effortless cleanliness is the result of an expensive and time-consuming battle against the city's grime. He is not born a gentleman, he is assembled, piece by piece, every morning. And the post-mortem photograph is the final, most profound expression of this philosophy. When faced with the ultimate, undeniable reality of death, the Victorian impulse is to reject it. It is to say, no, that is not the image we will accept. Instead, they construct a new reality. They prop up the body, paint life back into the face, and create a photograph of a perfect, peaceful, or even living moment. They choose the beautiful lie over the ugly truth. The photograph, the appearance, becomes the new, permanent reality that will be passed down through generations, while the memory of the actual, messy reality of sickness and death is allowed to fade. Here's a small detail that perfectly encapsulates this idea of appearance over reality: mourning etiquette. The rules for mourning were incredibly strict and complex, especially for a widow. She was expected to wear heavy, concealing black clothing, known as widow's weeds, for a year and a day, or often longer. Her social life was severely restricted. The key thing is that these rules were about the outward performance of grief. A widow who was secretly relieved to be free of an unhappy marriage still had to perform the role of the devastated mourner perfectly. Conversely, a widow who was truly heartbroken but failed to adhere to the correct sartorial timeline could be judged as disrespectful and cold. Her actual feelings were secondary to the correctness of her public appearance. Grief itself was a costume. The ongoing historical debate is about the why. Why was this era so uniquely obsessed with the facade? There's no single answer. Some historians point to the powerful influence of the emerging middle class. As people moved up the social ladder, they needed a way to signal their new status. Adhering to these complex codes of dress and behavior was a way to prove you belong. Others point to the deep-seated anxieties of the age. It was a time of rapid, destabilizing change: industrialization, urbanization, scientific discoveries that challenged religious faith, creating a highly ordered, controlled, and perfect appearance, both in life and in death. Could have been a psychological defense mechanism, a way to impose order on a chaotic and uncertain world. You look around at the shadowy figures moving through the gaslit streets. You see them differently now. You see the woman with the impossibly small waist and understand the cage she lives in. You see the man with the rigid posture and understand the secrets beneath his coat. You understand that the pursuit of beauty here is not just vanity, it's a form of social survival, a language of aspiration, and a defense against a frightening world. It's a culture that has so deeply invested in the surface that the surface has become the substance. The beautiful, perfect image is the goal, and reality is simply the raw, imperfect material used to create it. And as you stand on the street corner, on the cusp of waking up, you can't help but wonder how much of this strained, beautiful, and cruel world still lingers in our own. The fog on the Victorian street begins to thin, not revealing more cobblestones, but a soft, indistinct light. The sounds of horse-drawn carriages and hissing gas lights fade, replaced by a low, gentle hum, perhaps the sound of the fan in your room. You are beginning to drift away from this world of strict causery and dangerous cosmetics. But its echoes follow you. The pressures you've witnessed, the sacrifices made for an ideal, feel both distant and startlingly familiar. You think about the corset, that cage of hollow bone and steel designed to mold the female body into an unnatural, idealized shape. The physical object is gone, a relic in a museum. But the concept, the idea that a woman's body should be sculpted and disciplined to fit a fashionable silhouette lives on. It echoes in the language of beach bodies, in the punishing regimens of diet and exercise aimed at achieving a specific look, and in the modern shapewear that promises to smooth, lift, and constrict, albeit with more breathable fabrics. The cage has become less visible, more elastic, but its purpose remains eerily similar. You recall the obsession with a pale, flawless complexion, a sign of leisure that was maintained with parasols and poisonous potions. The specific color may have changed as sun-kissed tan has replaced pallor as the sign of a life of leisure for many, but the underlying principle persists. The quest for perfect skin continues in our own time, with an endless array of filters, foundations, and multi-step skin care routines. We've swapped lead and arsenic for ret in oil and hyaluronic acid, but the fundamental desire to present a perfected, blemish-free, and youthful face to the world is a direct inheritance from your Victorian counterparts. The fear of aging, of showing the natural marks of a life lived, is an anxiety that transcends time. Then you consider the men, with their carefully waxed mustaches and secret girdles. The pressure on men to perform a certain kind of masculinity through their appearance hasn't vanished either. The specific styles have changed. A well-groomed beard might now be more hipster than patriarch, but the multi-billion-dollar male grooming industry, with its specialized moisturizers, beard oils, and hair styling products, is the direct descendant of those tins of bear grease per mod. The expectation for a man to present a controlled, successful, and put-together image is still a powerful force incorporated in social life. And what about the post-mortem photograph? The practice of photographing the dead has, for the most part, become a cultural taboo. And yet, think about our modern digital lives. We curate our own images with meticulous care. We post our happiest moments, our most flattering angles, our greatest achievements. We are all, in a sense, creating a highly edited, idealized version of our lives for public consumption. We are building our own legacy in real time, photo by photo. It's a different kind of post-mortem photography, a pre-mortem one, where we construct the perfect memory of ourselves while we are still here. The Victorian desire to be remembered by a perfect image has been democratized, handed to each of us in the form of a smartphone. The historical debate about the legacy of this era is ongoing. Are we truly more enlightened than the Victorians? Or have we simply swapped one set of impossible standards for another? Some argue that we have more freedom and choice, that our beauty standards are more diverse and inclusive. Others contend that modern media and social networks have created a new, more pervasive form of pressure. A 24 made see panopticon of judgment that the Victorians, with their rigid separation of public and private life, could never have imagined. We may not be eating arsenic, but the mental and emotional toll of constantly striving for an unattainable, digitally altered ideal can be its own kind of poison. The last vestiges of the 19th century fade completely. The weight of the crinoline, the tightness of the corset, the scent of coal smoke, it all dissolves. You are left floating in the quiet of your own time. But the journey has left its mark. You've seen the extreme lengths people will go to for beauty, the way society can shape our very bodies and self-perception. The Victorians were not a strange, alien species. They were people, just like us, navigating a world of intense social pressure. Armed with the best and sometimes the most knowledge of their day, their story is a powerful, cautionary tale, a mirror showing us that the perfection we strive to perfect is often more complex and more costly than it appears. The world of the Victorians now recedes, like a shoreline shrinking in the distance. The sharp edges of their world, the stiff corners, the rigid hollow bone, the cold, hard cobblestones begin to soften and blur. The anxieties about appearance, the pressures of society, they all dissolve into a gentle, quiet mist. You are drifting now, no longer an observer on a foggy London street, but a passenger on a soft, slow current. There is no need to hold your posture straight anymore. Let your body feel heavy, sinking comfortably into the surface beneath you. The shallow, caustic breaths you were taking have deepened, slowing into a natural, easy rhythm. Inhale the calm of the present moment, and exhale the weight of the past. The intricate rules and demanding rituals of that bygone era have no hold on you here. You are free from the judgment of unseen eyes, floating in the peaceful sanctuary of your own mind. The faint, flickering gas lights have been replaced by a soft, steady glow behind your closed eyelids. The clatter of hoofs has given way to a profound and welcoming silence, the kind of quiet that allows for true rest. You have learned its story, you have felt its weight, and now you can let it go. It drifts away, becoming just another half-remembered dream, leaving you in this peaceful, comfortable darkness, ready for sleep. The end of the article. Good night.